Hi, Nicolette. It's great that you can be here. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about coaching. And I was wondering if you could tell us how long you've been coaching and what kind of coaching you do.
So, coaching is something that I had been doing informally for the longest time throughout my career in theatre. And as you can imagine, like dealing with various personalities and very people-driven and all the temperaments that go with working within the creative sector. I found myself informally coaching. And I got to a point where a lot was changing for me on a deeply personal level, which kind of informed my decision to step away from the theatre.
Right.
And so coaching, as much as it informed my decision making, coaching found me. And so I went and retrained as a coach through the Center for Coaching, which is based at UCT at GSB, and I also did the ICF credentialing, which seems to be a requirement for most, particularly corporate structures. You know, because there's so many short courses on coaching, which a lot of people are doing. And when I think about the training that we went through doing, I initially did the coaching for development, which really delves into yes, the rudimentary kind of background of coaching, and does equip you to practice as a coach. But then I went on to do the professional coaching course, which is a year-long course, which was so rewarding on so many levels. The course literally ripped me apart and put me back together again.
Wow.
And through that process, because the environment I had been in for almost 30 years tore me apart, really tore me apart.
Right.
And I couldn't believe that an industry that I was so passionate about could be so damaging on so many levels. And so doing the professional coaching course, I almost, people say that, I'm going on, I'm going to find myself, have my eat, pray, love moment. And that was my eat, pray, love moment.
Right.
And the love was just finding me again.
Right.
And just, again, recognizing my own self-worth and acknowledging the value that I can bring.
Right.
To
And that was
not just myself, but others. Yeah.
Right. So that was in the context of essentially a kind of a professional development program.
Professional development program, but I think all of it starts with you.
Yeah.
It starts with the individual, and so when I engage with coaching clients, my approach is very much on the individual. Yes, there are issues, but we coach the person and not the problem.
Right.
Because in building the person's capacity, they then walk away better equipped to deal with things both personally and professionally. And we realize that how the personal can affect the professional and vice versa. And really does impact how we show up at
Yeah.
any given time, in any given situation.
Mm. So the market is kind of rammed with coaching products. Um, it's quite hard to navigate. And I think one of the things that gets lost is what actually is coaching.
So we all have different interpretations. And there are various textbook answers to that question. Where I sit, and bearing in mind that I do focus largely on the person, it's about being coaching as a means to an end, and it's not a quick fix.
Right.
It's a journey, and it's a very fluid journey. One of the metaphors that I use quite often is being the river.
Right.
So as the river, the river flows, there are obstacles in the way, but you around it. You have the container, as in the banks of the river and the bed of the river, and and navigate life through that way as the river.
And you mentioned to me a little bit about integral coaching, which I believe you use the model or you work with the model.
Very much.
Yeah.
So integral coaching, the humans are by and large complex. By our very nature, we're complex. But there's the head space, there's the heart space, and then there's the whole body. Yeah. And so through the integral approach is to align it all, and so that you come away being able to show up living a more fulfilled life and being the best version of yourself you can present to the world.
Right. The term spiritual is sort of a dirty word or perhaps better to say just an ignored term in the business world. But a lot of leaders talk about their own spiritual journey and how that's part of their process of becoming. I wondered what the integral approach says about that, if anything.
It does play a huge role in that, but it's different for everyone. You kind of always say, take what you can use and discard the rest.
Yeah.
So a lot of the spiritual practices, such as, if you talk in a business sense, you talk about trust. And with trust and a breach of trust, which is a big thing, because trust is such a fragile thing. So it takes years to build trust, and it can be gone in an instant, depending on the situation. And then to rebuild that trust is quite an undertaking, because it really depends on the relationship, how much you value the relationship, who's aggrieved, to what extent. And then there's forgiveness, which is very much aligned with the spiritual, because a big part of that is forgiving yourself and then being able to let go and forgive others and move on from there.
Right. It's a huge topic, and it's a key aspect of leadership, this ability to build trust. I wondered if we could go for a moment to leadership, and I was wondering if you could tell me perhaps what you think a good leader is, perhaps what traits and what skills they might have.
Yeah, that's a big topic. It's a big hot topic. It's also very industry driven. Depending on where you sit. But some of the key things that I've encountered through my own experience and also dealing with others is communication.
Right.
Honesty, sincerity, integrity. But all of that, it's like you can narrow it all down to communication and how, not so much the what we say, but the how we say it. How we make requests. It's fine to lead a team, yeah, sure. But do I trust my team? How do I build that trust? And again, goes back to how do I communicate? So communication.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting one. The model that I work with is solution focus approaches, and it's interesting that I don't think that solution focus approaches sit by themselves, but they sit in the context of these other kinds of things that you're talking about. And so you can have a solution focus approach, for example, to teamwork or leadership, but without the communication element and the self-knowledge that is a part of that, it really won't go anywhere.
Yeah.
Trust
it really does go hand in glove.
Yeah.
It really does go hand in glove. So you can be a leader. You can know your product. But how do you let others know? People are people. We're not all mind readers. So it's got to start somewhere. So communication.
Yeah.
Again, it goes. It's for me. It's very interesting how it just circles back to that.
Yeah. So when you're in a coaching relationship, you mentioned that it can take quite a while. Really, it takes the time it takes. What kind of outcomes do you see with the clients that you've worked with? What kind of changes can they expect?
So the kinds of things that happen is that people, because they, just give you an example, like making promises you can't keep. So if you're gonna promise something, promise is a big word. It's like love and hate, big words. Because you're making a promise, there's an expectation. So are these expectations aligned? How are you communicating your expectation of yourself and others within the situation? There's that word again, communication.
Yeah.
So what I'm experiencing is that people are communicating better.
Right.
There's an openness. I also kind of am encouraged that through the process of coaching, people are listening better, because quite often we listen to and we react. People listen, absorb, take a breath, respond.
So it seems to me that there's almost an element here of encouraging the development of a kind of a selflessness, and a courage in the face of difficult communication.
And being mindful, just generally being mindful. Because with listening, with asking open questions, you're encouraging a dialogue. Dialogue. It's not just a top-down monologue. And approaching it that way, the possibilities that it opens up are limitless. And because you're the river and you're navigating this journey, you can, it's fluid, so it changes. And so you're open to those changes, which opens up more possibilities. So,
and again, there's a courage element there as well, isn't there? Because we feel safe around things that don't change. But in order to create, change has to happen.
Yeah. And it's inevitable. Change is inevitable. It's the way of the world. It's just how things work. And how we navigate that change is key. Are we open to the change?
So
because one of the things that I'm faced with quite often is particularly women in leadership. Because the top jobs are still very male dominated, and so women in leadership are still, they're there and they're doing amazingly, but it's rare. And so as women we need to be, there seems to be, and whether it's real or perceived, I need to be tougher, I need to be harder on my staff, I need to be I can't burst into tears, I need to almost hide who I am, really, and that's exhausting. If you cannot show up consistently, authentically, that's a problem. And very often, as a leader, if it's good to be able to show up as humane and show your vulnerable side. It's okay. Emotions are there all the time. But we, how we work with those, name it, acknowledge it, and then engage in the conversation. So back to communication.
Right. And so I was going to ask you what you think a coaching leader is, but I think we're really talking about that now. And so maybe I'd ask, do you think that there is such a significant difference between men and women in leadership, certainly around how they deal with emotions? And the reason I ask that is because some of the business leaders that I've known who've been men have actually similarly had difficulty showing emotion. But I would possibly go further to say that a lot of the time they don't really know what they feel unless they feel particularly angry. Like, that's the easily accessible emotion. Nobody, certainly men, don't feel any sense of shame or discomfort around feeling angry and expressing it. But the sort of nuances of a lot of other stuff seem to just be absent. Is that something that you have come across?
Yes. There's this, again, real or perceived, but culturally, there's a big cultural difference when it comes to like men and women. how we are socialized growing up.
Mm.
And a lot of that stuff, like a lot of how we are socialized growing up, informs how we show up as adults. So boys don't cry. What you can't wear pink? What, like, that's a girl thing. I know, like, in some cultures, the men eat before the rest of the family, particularly the women. It's the children, the men, and then the women. Women take care of the household. Men are the breadwinners, and it's 2020 more, so like things have changed, and the way the family unit is structured now is very different as well.
Mm. But I think you bring up an important point, because when we speak in the global north about culture, and especially around gender and things like that, I think firstly there's the possibility that there's a bit of an elitist tone about it, and I think that there's the potential that fundamentally none of us have really figured it out yet. But when we're doing business internationally, we're having to intersect with a lot of different cultures that have a lot of different ways of doing things that need respecting.
Yeah.
And I think that gets glossed over a little bit.
Yeah. And, because from an Asian perspective to an African perspective to an American perspective, and then North and South America, it's, there are different traditions and different norms that, codes by which people live and work. And so, as leaders, just encouraging people to be more culturally sensitive. Your world is not my world, is not the world.
Mm. So I'm reading a book called Conscious Business by sorry, my laptop's up on it, Fred Kofman. Which is just fascinating. And he's written a chapter on ontological arrogance. And it goes into this in some depth, and encourages that mindset of humility, that we really don't know all the answers. And that predilection to feeling that we know is, again, going back to that safe place where there's no flow and no acceptance of other ways of doing things.
And there's a lot of truth in there, more ways than one of skin in the cat, so a little humility goes a very long way. Very long way. And particularly when you are in a position of in leadership position, there's a degree of power that comes with that. And so how do you, and if you're not self-aware, how are you gonna display that?
And so it's like, if leadership is a pie, the base layer is kind of know thyself.
Know thyself, and as we know only too well, quite often the base layer of the pie is undercooked.
Yeah.
So, there's some very interesting work being done in places like Nigeria, where it is encouraged for people in leadership and management positions to have a coach, engage with a coach. So you're better able to engage with the conversation and be able to ask the difficult questions and to strive for alignment, better equipped to think on your feet and problem solve. I mean, that like feeds right into the solutions focused way of doing things. But yeah, conflict resolution is also another one. Being able to, again, not so much the what, but the how. How am I asking these questions? Being cognizant of the why question. Why it can be so judgmental. So when we're engaging with our teams, to leave the judgment at the door. Literally leave the judgment at the door, and come in open and willing to listen, and to be aware that conversation is really a two-way street. So as much as you're wanting others to accept your ideas, you also need to be open to listening to the ideas of your team if you're a team leader.
So if a leader has gone through a coaching process and becomes a leader with a coaching mindset, does that mean that they are bringing the techniques of coaching into their role, but in a self-referential way, or does that mean that they are actually taking on aspects of the team in a coaching relationship? How does that work?
So leading in a coaching way, a lot of just from what I've experienced, people, you when you engage in a coaching way, people see you showing up differently, and so it kind of, there's like a domino effect, a ripple effect that happens. So some toxic behaviors that were the norm, that were acceptable, if you can turn that around, and then suddenly it's not happening anymore, or it's not happening in the way that it used to. People go like, oh wow, that boundary's shifted now. So how, that was much more effective, much more pleasant to deal with, in managing things in a coaching way. So more people want to do that. And so the basic kind of principles that, particularly around things like communication and don't just permeate the workplace, but it then goes out, because it's stuff that stands you in good stead throughout your life, regardless of where you are and what you're doing. So it then goes to the family, it goes to the neighbors, it goes to so then it becomes like, ideally, in the ideal world, and we all know we don't live in an ideal world, but then, can you imagine entire communities showing up in a coaching way?
Right. And so if you want to affect organizational change, but particularly in the culture, this is really the key tool. But you're saying it goes way beyond that.
Yes, I mean, it potentially, absolutely. And when I think that in countries like South Africa, where I'm from, people, coaching is like a novel concept, and I've actually heard people say, oh no, that's white people stuff. It's the stuff of the colonizers. And you go, well, no, that here I am, person of color, as a coach. I'm here, I'm in the room, like, I'm asking the questions, I'm listening to what you're saying, and it's very, very interesting how people just, there's just a shift that happens, which is, it's beautiful to watch. I spoke earlier about active listening in terms of like the coaching conversation, and particularly in leadership circles. People feel valued when they feel heard, when they feel understood, when they feel seen. And, active listening has the capacity to bring that to the fore.
I wanted to ask you a question about change and maybe about resilience. So the business world is highly reactive. It doesn't cope well with forward planning, because forward planning usually means investment, and if you can't predict the outcome, then it becomes very high risk. So we see this in the oil industry, but then we also see it in places like renewables, where the support, for example, for investment doesn't exist. And so the investment isn't made. But then a few years later, for example, we get an edict from a court of law saying that we need to increase our renewable energy output. And it's not there, and there's a latency there. And we saw this in the COVID crisis. People had been quite senior and well-respected scientists had warned for a considerable amount of time that this was on the cards. And, we have on record the Spanish flu. And it kind of caught everybody unawares. A lot of businesses went bust. And the whole world for a while shifted to this kind of online video call mode of doing business. And I wonder in the context of that, how being a coaching leader kind of helps. There's this need for human engagement, and now a lot of us are still stuck behind these kind of video screen systems.
Are we stuck? Do we not have more choices now?
Some of us do. And I know people who are actively choosing online work because they find office culture quite toxic.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done around that toxic work culture, but it can filter through on the ether as well. It can filter through. I think, one of the things that came through COVID was, we have a very different way of working, a different way of communicating. And in some ways it's positive, in some ways it's like a negative, because that I need to make an appointment to make an appointment to make a phone call to make an appointment. Like, why can everything is done, like, we email and we kind of just pick up the phone and have a conversation, so a lot of stuff is kind of a lot of stuff's gotten lost in how we communicate. That casual meeting someone in the corridor of the office building, or just, I need to know something, so let me just get up and go to someone's office and ask the question. So now I send an email, then I've got to wait for a reply, and then and then we've got to have a meeting about it just so in some ways it's kind of, we've cut a lot of the red tape, but we've also added a lot of red tape, because there are a lot of things that we used to do that we don't do anymore. We can't really. And we talk about the new normal, but what's normal? Define normal. Like, what does it mean? Like, in the real world? Yeah. I'm gonna let you know when I've figured it all out. Yeah. But it's I have been a lot of my coaching is done online, so and one's got to find different ways of because we, as humans, we're social beings, so we feed off the energy of others. And how do we still harness that without, we are having conversation like continents apart. So what, but then, you still have an energy, and we're still able to communicate effectively.
And of course, that will only get better. This is a very new technology still.
Practice.
I'm looking forward to seeing you in splendid 4K, for example.
Yeah. I mean, there are lots of things to be excited about. And I think, particularly in the field of coaching, where one's not just restricted to where you are. You could be anywhere, which has been my experience recently, in recent times.
Yeah.
And so you're able to reach more people, and hopefully, in being able to reach more people, we're going to get the message about coaching out in the world, and people are going to tap into it, and we're going to be better humans.
Yeah. So is there any question that you would have liked me to ask you?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But I think, if anything, just to say that, coaching leaders, it's not just, it doesn't just stay within the workplace. It really does permeate other aspects of life. And simple things like, how we breathe, yeah, in and out, yeah. But, when we stress, the breath is up here, and then we forget that there's like a whole diaphragm that needs to be activated. And that can be a very powerful exercise, even online. I think it's, we're not spending so much time in traffic working online, which leaves us open to spending more time, and how we choose to spend that time. Often when I was coaching in person, I would ask, so if you had an extra hour in the day, what would you do? So now I have an extra hour in the day, and you know what, like, can we just maybe use that hour to just harness a bit of joy? Like, I'm doing this job and it's thankless, yes, but can you use some time just to spare a thought for why you opted to go in this direction in the first place? Because there must have been something about it that appealed to you.
Yeah.
So go back to the beginning, go back to where you started, and we go from there. So that's where we can spend the extra time.
Perfect. Thank you, Nicolette. If anybody wants to get in touch with you directly, you've got a website, haven't you?
I do. It's pretty simple, njmoses.com.
And I'll pop a link in the description.